To be honest, I didn't even know it was an option as a business. I've always heard of businesses reporting on carbon emissions, but my awareness of any business looking at their impact on biodiversity was limited. So I just didn't really know it was an option as a business. As an individual, I've always been aware of biodiversity loss, but I'd never put the two and two together with the business.
So biodiversity is absolutely fundamental to business. I think we tend to think of them as separate things, but businesses are becoming increasingly aware that if they are so tied up in the kind of value around biodiversity. Things like agriculture and pharmaceuticals are massively dependent on nature to provide the resources that generate those economic benefits. So as biodiversity continues to decline, we find ourselves in a situation where raw materials become unavailable, supply chains are affected, food insecurity becomes a serious issue, which kind of affects things like defence, etc. So understandably, governments, people and businesses are really, really interested in finding solutions to put these two together.
So there's regulatory pressure. So all sorts of laws have come online and will come online that basically require businesses to, for example, lower their carbon emissions or manage their impact on water resources or reduce their plastics pollution, etc., etc., etc. So if the government wants you to do something, you've got to listen.
The risk of business inaction on this is really tangible, in that businesses are really becoming ill-prepared for near-term challenges that they might face. And that is things like regulation, not being prepared for regulation, not being prepared for supply chain issues, and also just facing bad press and backlash from their customers.
Whilst currently, organisations probably have to report in some way, either legally, sort of through a framework or kind of a legislation, or through their supply chain to their, their emissions. Currently, you don't have to do that around your sort of wider natural impact. Realistically, that is likely to become the case, I think, over the next sort of 5-10 years. Organisations are going to have to be reporting around their broader environmental impact, their biodiversity impact, their ecological impact, not just their emissions.
The TNFD initiative has been developed to help businesses understand their impact on biodiversity and natural resources.
So essentially, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, or the TNFD, is a new regulation that's coming into force to help businesses understand their impacts and dependencies on nature. Many businesses may be able to relate it to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is a very similar kind of regulation, but this one specifically focuses on biodiversity and natural resources. So for UK businesses, it's becoming really relevant because it'll soon be mandatory for larger organisations to report against this, in which case that will filter down into smaller businesses and their supply chains. And the TFND helps businesses measure and manage their risks in terms of biodiversity loss. So meeting these standards is going to become really important for businesses in terms of risk mitigation and regulation.
So we work with a lot of builders who increasingly will be asked to look at biodiversity and their impact when they're building on the environment around them. So I'm hoping it will become increasingly a part of our business as part of that supply chain in the whole construction industry.
It's all about bringing positive, practical research into business in a tangible way that leads to improvements in nature, biodiversity and climate-related issues.
With this new knowledge, businesses can make informed decisions about the changes they need to make.
So businesses need to start by measuring their impact. So looking at things like water and land use, looking at waste, anything that might impact around nature, and looking at how your supply chain impacts on nature. So it might not be immediately obvious what your impact is, but actually whether you take raw materials or ingredients, you can start to look at that and measure the impacts and make choices around the kind of suppliers you use or the types of raw materials you use.
If we're a manufacturer, do we really understand where our raw materials come from and what the impact around the biodiversity and the ecology, not just locally on our site, but perhaps on the site where they're produced and the like is as well.
If I buy, as a Cornwall garment producer, lots and lots of cotton, hopefully from organic sustainable sources, then, well, my production creates a huge environmental footprint elsewhere. So how do I take responsibility for that? Well, one way of doing that is to work with my suppliers to change their practices.
Whilst businesses need to reduce the impact their site has on the environment, investing in local biodiversity action will bring the biggest benefits.
The second thing that organisations can do is really look at the wider impact of their business. So you might invest in something on your site, but actually the more impactful investment might be looking at your local community, say around flood mitigation or around nature restoration programmes. So it's very important to measure and then take a really holistic view of your business and understand how you can maximise your maximise the return on your investment in nature.
Each company is embedded in a place, in a community, in a particular ecosystem. So I think it makes a lot of sense to invest time, energy and money into making that place the best we can. Investing in local communities, and investing in local water management systems, and investing in local afforestation projects, for example, investing in local projects that improve biodiversity. Lots and lots of local action, which also has great social impacts, I find.
Even if you don't really appreciate the value for biodiversity, there is a human benefit to improving our environment. I think most people would much rather look at flowers than they would at concrete. So there's well-being benefits, at least to me, walking up and down the industrial estate to see that.
To find out how the University of Exeter can support your organisation's climate and nature actions, please visit greenfuturesolutions.com.